Fantastic. Let me put my slideshow up. Okay. So first thing I'll say, let me get my little pointer so I can point things out. Where did it go? There it is. So first thing that I'll say is the title of this originally was supposed to be post-pandemic mental health supports at each tier, school counseling tiers. And about 2 weeks, well, now I think it was about a month ago, about 2 weeks before the first one dropped in August, it was going through like the final approval levels at TEA, and my boss said, I've been watching the news and I think maybe we need to take post-pandemic off. I think we might need to just call it pandemic again. And then of course, Delta just inundated us. And yeah, so we'll call this pandemic / post-pandemic mental health supports. And basically when I went in and I just kind of tweaked it a little and revised it for our current reality, which is different than it was 6 weeks ago, I kind of thought of, let me create this presentation so it's good for, let's say, the next 18 months. So there's a lot of stuff in here that you can use to support your kids as we're in the middle of a pandemic. And then there's a lot of transitioning materials that you can use to support your kiddos, hopefully, maybe even as early as next semester when we finally get into the post-pandemic stage, whenever that occurs. So with that, let me jump into just some quick introductions. If you haven't seen me present before, I am the Counselor Support Program Manager at TEA. And so basically, if you're a school counselor, I am your primary point of contact at TEA. And here is my email. Email is the easiest way to get a hold of me. I never know where I'm going to be, especially in this crazy world we live in. As you can see today, I'm actually here at TEA, but the idea is a lot of travel, which isn't happening, of course, with COVID. And so it's always good to just email me and then we can set up a time to video chat or talk by phone or whatever it is that you need. And so my role at TEA is, more than anything else, to support the strong implementation of a counseling program, a comprehensive counseling program. And that's become even more of a focus with SB 179, which of course is the 80-20 that, counselors are being tasked with spending at least 80% of their time on counseling duties, according to the Texas model, which is based in statute. So I was brought on to TEA a little over a year ago to help counselors set up their CSCP, their comprehensive school counseling program. Because I had one when I was a school counselor, and you can see down here, I was a counselor for about 11 years in a Central Texas district, Del Valley, and I was elementary and secondary. I did that for about 11 years. We started out as a very rural district in 2008 and earlier, and then now they're very healthily suburban, and they're soon to become an urban district as the Austin, Texas sprawl just, explodes outward. And my own background is I have a MS in counseling and a BS in education. My district that I worked in was Title I, the entire district. So high poverty, high trauma, very high need, which really set me up for being able to support kids and counselors during what we consider a worldwide collective trauma, which is the pandemic. And so then the other thing I do at TEA is I develop resources and trainings all based around whatever school counselors need. And so even with this training, which is not about comprehensive school counseling programs, it's of course about pandemic support, mental health support for our kids, you'll hear how I fit that into a comprehensive school counseling program and kind of where that falls in programming. So in our agenda today, we're starting off with introductions, and we've pretty much gotten through that. We'll jump right into the first objective, which is looking at the research. We've been in this pandemic now for a year and a half, I don't know, something like that, 1 to 2 years. And the good news is we have a lot of data. There's a lot of research on what kids are dealing with And of course, as school counselors, we intuitively know, we have common sense. We can see it every day what they're dealing with, but it's always kind of nice to have the studies and the research to sort of back up what we know we're seeing anyway. So we'll talk about that. Then we'll get into our second objective, which is what do we do about these mental health struggles we're seeing? And we'll look at that at, the tier 1 universal, tier 2 targeted, tier 3 intensive, and we'll talk a little bit about multi-tiered system of supports and how we can fit our counseling interventions into that. We'll wrap it up with a conclusion. I have a survey for you all, which is really a great way for you to be able to tell me what you need this year. And then I can take all that information back to my bosses here at TEA and we can start working on, what y'all's needs are. And Q&A at the end. Of course, feel free to, I think there's only let me see, how many people did I see in here? I think there's only 20, 25 of us. So feel free to unmute if you want to ask a question or put it in the chat anytime. Typically I go pretty much right up until 11, just because this is a lot of information, but for anybody that wants to stay on after 11 for a few minutes, I'm happy to stay and answer questions. I don't have anywhere I have to be, I think, until 11:30. So happy to do that. So let's talk about research and our first objective. What does the research say about kids' mental health during this pandemic? And so one of the major organizations that's giving us a lot of data and a lot of, summaries of studies is the CDC, of course. And so their big study that came out on how the pandemic is affecting kids' mental health was started in April 2020 and then went through the end of 2020. And what they found is that in the emergency room, mental health related visits for kids 5 to 11 increased 24%. In the emergency room, mental health related visits for kids 12 to 17, so our adolescents, went up 31%. Those numbers are off the charts. We don't see numbers like that, like in 1 year going up 20 and 30%. So again, we're not surprised as school counselors. We knew this was coming. We could have told you this the first week of the pandemic, that this would be the outcome, but it's really kind of neat to see it shake out in the studies and the research. And it continues, which again, I'm not telling y'all anything you don't know because you're seeing it every day in your work, but the CDC has done a couple studies, or they've looked at a few studies since then, and they have seen that this increase, the 24 and the 31%, is continuing. They're actually able to disaggregate it a little bit and see where, with gender and with demographics and ages, where the issues are popping up. So like suicidal ideation, for example, is highest among adolescent girls in these emergency room visits. And so what the CDC has said as a result of this is that there are 3 critical needs that kids have right now. The first is that we're monitoring indicators of their mental health. So what are we doing in our guidance lessons and in our groups and in our daily work at school to keep an eye on our kids and to tell teachers how to do that and teach parents how to do that so that we can help them when the mental health needs are starting, as opposed to when they go into full-blown crisis. Second critical need is promoting coping and resilience, and pretty much everything we go over in objective 2 will be around that. I'll give you a lot of resources for that. And then the third is expanding access to services for children's mental health. And so that's where we're really going to dive into tier 3 and what can we do to link our families and our kids with outside community resources, because, as school counselors, we cannot do all of the things all the time. And so we have to be bringing in other agencies to help out. So another organization that's looked at the research and kind of curated some data around children's mental health during the pandemic is the American Psychological Association. And so what they've said, kind of their big theme is we want to remove the stigma around mental health issues. So, nobody feels embarrassed about going to the doctor when they have a cold. or when they have, I don't know, sinus infection and they need some antibiotics. But boy, we have very different feelings about going to the doctor if we're struggling with depression and anxiety. And so the APA is very concerned about that because stigma means people don't reach out for help. And then the other is making sure students can access mental health programs. And we'll talk a lot about how we can do that as school counselors or how we can assist with that. So basically, the APA comes up with 3 kind of recommendations for schools. Leaders, educators, of course, the school counselors, we fall right into that group. The first is to share educational resources with staff and students. So I'll give you a lot of those. To talk about mental health and allow students the opportunity to vent and to process and to, share what they're going through. A lot of that we'll talk about in our Tier 1 guidance lesson supports. And then letting students know they're not alone. Even though we're all experiencing this pandemic differently, our lived experiences are very different for the trauma of the pandemic, depending on who we are and what our reality in life is. We are still all going through it together. And there's comfort in that, there's comfort in letting kids know that we're all in this together and we can help each other, we can support each other and, kind of take some comfort from that. So another organization, of course, mine, Texas Education Agency, has kind of thrown their hat into the ring on what they're seeing in the data and what they recommend. And so for us at TEA, our main theme is providing interventions aligned to needs. So like I said, different parts of Texas and different cities and communities are experiencing the pandemic differently. And so we want to make sure we provide interventions that are flexible enough that they can be, used by lots of different groups. And so the main way to do that is responding to students' academic and mental health wellness needs. Sometimes we call it SEL, sometimes we call it mental health wellness. And TEA has a school mental health website, which I've linked here, that highlights mental health wellness interventions. There's just tons and tons of them on that page that you can look at. We also have a school mental health toolkit coming out. Word on the street is that it will drop on September 9th. So that's just a few days away. Could be already out there. I haven't checked this week because sometimes things get released a little bit early or it might be a little bit after, but the drop date is September 9th. And that toolkit is going to have just tons of resources. So what I heard last week was that the toolkit is so big and extensive that it's going to get its own website, kind of like Project Restore has its own website. But you can go to the school mental health website, which is linked here, and you'll be able to find out where, I don't have the URL for the new website because I don't even know if it's created yet. A lot of times they'll do that and just open it up the night before. So you can find whatever you need here if we don't have an updated website that comes out to you like the day before. And then the USDE, US Department of Education, has also looked at a lot of the research and concerns around children's mental health with the pandemic. And their big theme at USDE is adopting a trauma-informed approach, which of course makes sense because, like I said, we're all going through a collective traumatic experience. So why not just tweak our practices, or maybe not? So many of us as school counselors are doing trauma-informed work, and we might not even know it as that. We might not even be calling it that. But when you actually look at the definition and characteristics around trauma-informed practices, it's basically everything we do as school counselors. So, the idea in the USDE's COVID-2 document, which came out in April, and I've linked it in the I've linked it in the references. So if you want to read that document, it's amazing. Basically, I was having a little bit of panic attacks back in April and in March when, TEA was saying, hey, we want this presentation of how do we support our kids post-pandemic. And I was thinking, well, there's no precedent for this. I can't go back to like 1980 or 1990 and see what they did then for it. And so that was scaring me a lot. And then the US Department of Education, right around that time, released their COVID Volume 2, Reopening of Schools, and it is so fantastic. It's only about 50 pages long, which might sound long, but for a document that goes out to the whole nation, 50 pages is very doable, super easy to read, and it just has wonderful ideas and resources. And a lot of the stuff that I talk about in this presentation comes from that USDE COVID-2 doc. And so basically with the USDE saying the main point is let's do trauma-informed work, we felt great here at TEA because we were one step ahead of that with our Project Restore that came out right around this time last year. And Project Restore is a 6 session or a 6 module training for how to do trauma-informed work in schools. And it's really well done. It's really well put together. I linked it here. I see school counselors using it either to increase their own trauma-informed knowledge or to work in conjunction with their admin to present Project Restore to their staff, to teach their staff about trauma-informed practices. And you can, there's 6 videos and a facilitator's manual. So you can do all 6. You can maybe just start with the first one that's overview to trauma-informed practices. If you're a TBRI district and you already know a lot about trauma-informed practices, you might just jump to the 4th, 5th, or 6th module, which are much more advanced topics around trauma. And I'll tell you, as somebody who has written a book on trauma-informed school counseling, every time I go into Project Restore, and especially the upper modules, I learned something new. So there's just so much good information in there. So with that, we get into our second objective, which is, what do we do about this? We know from the CDC, we know from the APA, USDE, even our ESSER doc here that we produced through TEA, that kids are struggling. Their mental health is struggling. And here we were hoping we're post-pandemic, but now it looks like we're even going to have some schools that are not able to. I know in my Austin area, the public health officials are talking about one big district that they are just kind of recommending they close because there's so much COVID popping up everywhere. And so we're right kind of back where we were, where kids are struggling because they're not getting the social interaction they need. They're anxious and depressed and sad and worried about, family members and just what COVID could mean for them. So let's talk about what we can do for that. Basically, we are going to think of this in terms, let me move my screen around a little bit so I can see the same things y'all are seeing. Basically, we're going to think of these interventions, these pandemic or post-pandemic interventions in the multi-tiered system of supports model, MTSS, which looks like this pyramid right here. And MTSS is wonderful because it really clearly lays out the counselor's role in providing mental health support to kids, very much endorsed by ASCA and now TEA as well. I think MTSS really took off about 10 to 15 years ago nationwide. In Texas, we embraced it maybe about 2 years ago. If you've been in school counseling for a while, like I have been, then you might have been raised professionally like me on the RTI model. That's what I was taught. That's how you school counsel is through the RTI model. And so MTSS basically just takes RTI and kind of it brings it in to a more simplified and comprehensive framework. That's just fantastic. And if you're somebody that's very comfortable with RTI, then you will love MTSS because that's been my reality. So basically what MTSS does is it tells us as school counselors that we provide or coordinate, if we're working with other outside partners or teachers, Tier 1 support for all students. So that's our blue universal level. We provide or coordinate Tier 2 targeted interventions for identified students. So that's our yellow. That might look like individual sessions, student support groups, whatever interventions you can have on your campus. And then Tier 3 intensive, we collaborate and consult. So most of what we do I would say all of what we do, except that using the word all, there's always an exception. So I won't do that. 99% of what we do at tier 3 is indirect services, providing indirect services. We are not directly counseling or working with kids so much at tier 3. That's what we're doing at tier 1 and 2. By the time we get to tier 3, we're referring them out. And so we're going to talk a lot more about this specifically at each tier. So let's jump in. Okay, so tier 1 supports. So looking at first at the blue part of the pyramid, the bottom part, this is where all students' mental health is supported universally. So we think of it like the same way every kid in the school gets a math class, every kid in the school should be getting counseling classes. Now, what that looks like for different campuses is different. It depends on your campus reality. With providing direct services through guidance lessons, which I'm kind of getting ahead of myself here, but school counselor role, large group class instruction, large group and school-wide activities, and student appraisal and advisement. Okay, so that's how we provide our tier 1 support. And what that looks like at different campuses can be very different because, you know, we have some campuses where school counselors have been doing guidance lessons every week since the dawn of time. Fantastic. More is more with tier 1. That's where we want to spend most of our time. But if you're at a campus where you've never done a guidance lesson before, then huge progress this year would be 1 fall and 1 spring guidance lesson. So there's nothing wrong with starting with baby steps. We don't need to, you know, even with SB 179, we don't need to change everything overnight. You know, it's more about if you've never done a guidance lesson and you do a semester, 2 semester guidance lessons this year, then maybe next year you're doing a guidance lesson a quarter, you're up to 4. And then maybe the year after you're doing a guidance lesson a month. And then maybe you're working up to a guidance lesson a week, you know, baby steps, and that's totally fine. So what does that look like in terms of pandemic interventions? What are we doing at tier 1 in our guidance lessons with pandemic interventions? Well, I think it's good to start off with a needs assessment. And I've linked here to University of Maryland SHAPE website, which is like their clearinghouse of everything, assessment, UBI, universal basic screeners. What else do they have there? Basically just anything around documentation of mental health, behavioral health, social emotional work, mental health, of course. You're going to be able to find it at that needs assessment link right there. Oh, and something I didn't mention at the beginning, y'all have a copy of this presentation, or if you don't, I know Valerie will send it out to you, but probably she already has because she's quick like that. And so all of the links that you see in my PowerPoint that I'm showing you are hot links in your PDF of the same presentation. And so you can click right on them and go wherever you need to go. So at the University of Maryland Needs Assessment Factory, as I like to call it, you have 2 options there. You can either learn how to make your own needs assessment because they walk you through it there, or you can find an already created needs assessment, like the Wisconsin one is kind of the one that comes to mind. It's really good, but they have lots of them. And basically what you're doing with the needs assessment is you are working with admin and your support team, whoever that is. I mean, sometimes we call them SSTs, sometimes we call them LSTs, sometimes we call them building leadership team, whoever it is in charge of supporting students at your school. And it should not just be you as the school counselor. We are on a team of professionals that support students. And working very closely with our admin, our assistant principals, and our principals. The idea is to send out a needs assessment that really looks at what your community's pandemic mental health needs are for your school population. And that mental health toolkit, TEA's school mental health toolkit that I mentioned, where did I mention it? Here on the TEA page, school mental health website with toolkit, that has a needs assessment. I actually got my first look at it, or it has needs assessments. I got my first look at it late last week. They're beautiful. They're amazing. So, you know, you don't need to recreate the wheel. It's coming if you want to use that. Also, our Texas model, which is here and also linked. Where did I link the Texas model? The Texas model is linked up here with the Green School Counseling title. It has needs assessments on pages 62 through 64. If I'm remembering that correctly off the top of my head, I think it's around 62 to 64. And now keep in mind, these needs assessments were written in 2018 and they are not specific to the pandemic, but they're really good. And you could add a few of your own pandemic related questions or put some pandemic themes into the different questions or statements, and then that would work fine for you. So starting with needs assessments, and then using those needs assessments to kind of determine what's going to happen in your guidance lessons with whole class stress reduction techniques and also pandemic processing class discussion. So there's lots of different things that you could do in your guidance lessons to support kids with pandemic mental health struggles, but it really is shaking out to be falling under the two main topics of they need stress reduction techniques and they need discussions. And of course, that looks different for the littles than it does for the bigs, but discussions over processing it. How do we process this thing that we're all going through? So for whole class stress reduction techniques, I've linked here to Mind Yeti, which is a website that has 15 free like video lessons on mindfulness. They're fantastic. Mind Yeti brands it as any age, even adults can use it. And what I found when I looked at it is some of them seem a little bit more appropriate for your littles. Some of them are a little bit more mature. You could use it for your high schoolers. And there's 15. So, you know, kind of just get in there, look around and pick a handful that you like the best if you want to use Mind Yeti. What else can I say? Oh, also, I have a book that's in the resources slide. So we'll get to that in a few minutes. Let me just check my time here. But just while we're in this section, I'll mention it. It is called Helping in Hard Places, and it has a trauma-informed guidance lesson curriculum in it. And that's what everything we're doing right now is trauma-informed. So, you know, it fits in really well with that. The other resource I've linked here, and actually there's two resources. One is linked here, and then one is going to be in the chat, is that idea that we want to help our students process the pandemic. And so this document here, from I don't remember who, actually came out of this one that says lessons and activities. It actually came out in the middle of the pandemic. So it's a little bit dated, but still, I mean, we're really doing a deja vu of August 2020, I feel like right now. So especially page 3 of this link, you'll find some really good activities for the youngers, and then questions, you know, where you, because I feel like with high school kids, you could get them in a circle and you could just throw out a couple good pandemic processing topics and, you know, like just restorative circle it, kind of a thing. So this is one resource. The other resource though, which I actually think is better, I linked in the chat. It didn't make it into this presentation, but it's a cell toolkit from the Mental Health Transfer Technology Network, or I'm not really sure how that relates to pandemic processing, but it's an amazing document, and it was just created in the last few months. And it has all kinds of questions that you can use for discussions, as well as activities that you can kind of lead your kids through, especially the younger ones that might need more active and less discussion, so that they're processing what they're going through. So those are some resources to help there. Let me just make sure I'm not forgetting anything before we move on to tier 2. Okay, so tier 1, just backing up for a quick second, that's every kid. Every kid in the school is getting a guidance lesson, whether it's 2 guidance lessons a year or whether it's 25 guidance lessons a year. Like I said, more is more with tier 1. That's where we want to be spending most of our time, but it's a transition. You know, maybe we've always spent most of our time here, and so now we're having to make the transition to kind of, get to more kids. So once you have taught your tier 1 guidance lessons, even if it's only 2, let's say on stress management, you're going to take care of most kids. Most kids are going to be good to go with the tier 1 support, just like most kids do okay in the math class with just the math lesson. But we still get 10 to 20% of our kids where the math lesson or the counseling guidance lesson wasn't enough. So those are our kids that go to math tutoring, or those are our kids in the counseling world who we provide direct services through individual counseling and group supports. And yes, they do go together in tier 2. So I know, again, if you're raised on RTI like I was, you think of tier 2 as group and tier 3 as individual. So MTSS puts them together in one tier. And it's very purposeful. It makes a lot of sense if you think about it, because we can, with the numbers that we have, even if you're a unicorn school counselor that has the 250-to-1 ratio, which I think I've met like 4 of them in my life. Most of us have our numbers up around 400, 500, 600, 700 kids to a school counselor. The only kind of targeted work we can do is short term, 2 to 4 individual sessions, 6 to 8 group sessions. And so at that level, even though we might be working one-on-one with a kid, we're doing so little of it that it falls under targeted supports. It does not fall under intensive tier 3. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I get to intensive. So what does that look like in related to the pandemic? Your main, I think, tool is going to be your student support groups. And so I've linked here to some Ask a documentation on that, just to kind of set you up if you feel like you haven't done groups before and you're not really sure how to get started. This is a great place to kind of ease yourself into it. And then what it looks like to me, so I love group counseling. I'm a huge advocate of it. I've written books on group counseling. I ran groups, hundreds of groups in my years as a school counselor. What it looks like to me when I read the research and the data is that there are 3 main types of groups that are most needed right now to support pandemic mental health. Grief and loss, that's your first one. Anxiety and stress reduction, that's your second. And social skills for reintegration. Now, that doesn't mean that a girls empowerment group or a anger management group isn't needed. It could be, it absolutely, those are wonderful things to do. But just in the context of a pandemic with so many of our kids losing family members, worrying about family members or themselves, and then especially our littles who, I have a niece who's 2, no, she's 3, and they put her in preschool, even though it seemed kind of scary with COVID, because they're like, she's never talked to another person outside of the family before. So, that kind of building social skills is really needed, especially for our littles and even the big ones too. So resources around this. TEA has a grief-informed webpage that has links to lots of different curricula, such as Coping Cat is a really good one. So yeah, you can kind of just go into that webpage there and see what you see and pick out whatever it is you like. Another resource around anxiety, again, going back to the school mental health webpage, that toolkit that's coming out, but also on the webpage now, right now, are links to various resources. And I think a lot of our anxiety resources are going to fall under the link that's titled Positive Youth Development. So if you click this link and you look around there for positive youth development, you're going to find some really good anxiety and stress reduction resources for groups or for individuals. Another one I have is this one. This is a TEA group counseling guide. I wrote it last year right around this time. I think it came out last year in September. And it's 6 sessions of how to process the pandemic and learn strategies for handling stress around it. And obviously we're still right in the middle of it. So this is, I took a look at this last month and I was like thinking, do I need to revise it? Nope. Everything in here are still the things that we need and our kids need. So a lot of you may have this already. because it went out through the ESCs last year, and then I think maybe also through our newsletter. But if you don't have it, and Valerie, I'm not sure if you have it or not, because you might not have been in the position at the time. I can't remember. If Valerie has it, she'll send it out to you if you need it, or you can email me, or Valerie, you can email me and remind me and I can send it to you.
We actually have it posted on our website.
Oh, you're so
under
awesome.
guidance curriculum. So
fantastic. That's perfect. And it's a group counseling guide, but with some tweaking, you could absolutely take these sessions and put them into a guidance lesson. So that would work too. And then in terms of social skills for integration, nobody does anything in school counseling better than the American School Counselor Association. And so they have a whole toolkit around social skills for reintegration with links to social awareness and relationship building. So basically, if you go to this link and you scroll down and look for the social learning video lessons subtitle or subcategory, you'll find them, and it's like 10, 15, I don't know, 5 to 10 different video lessons with kids' names. And it's like, how Jorge works on social awareness and how Jennifer builds relationship skills. And so those are fantastic. And it's housed, I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, in the middle school toolkit, which means our middle school people, you're covered. Our elementary school people can take the simpler social skill lessons and use it for their kids. And then our high school people can take the more mature ones and use it for their kiddos. We definitely don't need to be using all of them. And there's quite a few in there. So there's a lot of flexibility with how to use that. So the last tier is tier 3, and kind of going back for a moment to tier 2 and how we think about, these were the kids, this was the 10 to 20% that after the stress management guidance lesson were still super stressed. So we put them in groups on stress management, and that takes care of most of our tier 2 kiddos, but you're still going to have your, oops, I'm going the wrong way. You're still going to have your 1 to 2% now that even after your guidance lessons on stress management, even after your group sessions on stress management, and a little bit of individual too, maybe, they're still struggling. They're still having panic attacks in the nurse's office. The parent's still calling you to come out and meet the kid at the car in the drive-through because they won't get out of the car. They're too afraid of getting COVID at school. And so that's where we really transition ourselves from direct to indirect services. So you can see here the counselor role for tier 3 is providing referrals and community resources that treat mental health issues. Because what we're trying to do here is remove barriers to learning and help students get back to the classroom. Our job at tier 3 is not to provide the intensive support or minute by minute make it happen. Our job at tier 3 is to help remove barriers to learning and get that child back in the classroom. And the way we do that is giving them referrals to, a therapist in the community, a mental health clinic in the community, pediatrician, whatever works for the situation. So in terms of pandemic interventions, this one is pretty simple because we're just referring out. And so TEA has a webpage with mental health resources, and if you do like the save to print workaround, on your computer, and you save this link here as a PDF, it prints out for you a perfect one-page front and back list of community resources. Now, keep in mind, TEA is all of Texas, and Texas is huge. So this is primarily going to be your hotlines, your telehealth, and it's not going to be specific to your region, your area. What you would do then is add your own local resources to it if you don't already have that. And, maybe you don't need this at all. Maybe you've already got a really great referral sheet all ready to go. But for people that don't have one, this is a good place to start. And then you can add your a list of your own therapists in your community to that, for example. And the last part of these interventions is follow-up. You want to make sure, and this kind of gets us back again to the idea of a counseling program. You want to make sure that you have a protocol in your program, however simplified you want to make it, where every kid that comes through you for tier 3 is getting a follow-up from you related to that tier 3 support. So like in my reality, all of our tier 3s, they were always crisis kids, because you're at that high level of need. And so whenever we had a kid in crisis, we would complete a crisis form on them that we would submit to our principal so that our principal knew, who was in crisis and what was happening. And the bottom section of that crisis form was follow-up. And then all kinds of different options, like, are we offering them a group? Are we getting documentation from their parent or from their therapist? Are we asking them the 3 Hertz questions again? Whatever needed to be done. But we made sure that we were pulling that kid back in, checking in with the family, and making sure that whatever we referred them out to was helping them, meeting their needs if they needed anything else from us. And I have a whole presentation on this last bullet, which is crisis prevention and intervention in school counseling. So if anybody needs that, Valerie may already have it. And if not, she can just remind me and I can send that out, because some people want that kind of paperwork and or that kind of documentation, and we have it all ready to go. All right, so I'm going to talk about this slide very, very little, because I have been trying to take it off my presentations for about 6 months now, hoping that we would get away from virtual learning and social distancing and be able to get back to normal. I actually did take it off this presentation, and then I put it right back on a month ago. So this is the same stuff you've seen from me before. If you've heard me present about virtual school counseling and counseling during a pandemic. The only one that I really want to point out, because it's slightly different and updated, is ASCA's guidance. So ASCA had 3 toolkits last year: middle school, elementary school, high school, COVID toolkit. That was everything pandemic, everything virtual. They were phenomenal. And now what they've done is they've taken those 3 toolkits and they've embedded them into an entire COVID school counseling, pandemic school counseling, like section of their website, which is amazing. And they're updating it as far as I can tell right now, every week. Now that'll probably be less once the school year really gets underway. But I just wanted to give that one a shout out, because that's a really, really helpful resource. If your school does go virtual, or you have kids that are virtual, or social distancing becomes a big issue again, which sounds like it already is. 2 other resources, just while I'm thinking about them. I'm going to wait till I get to my conclusion for that. All right, I'm just getting ahead of myself. So one other thing I want to talk real quickly about is supporting staff with mental health issues. And the reason I want to talk about this just for a minute or 2 is because we are being asked to do that constantly, and that is not our primary role. So we have to do some navigation through that, because we don't want to, shut staff down or our administration and say, no, we don't do that. But we also don't want to get pulled so far out of our kid lane that we're, one, working unethically, because if we're counseling adults, we're working unethically. Our job as school counselors is to counsel children, not adults. So like, kind of what's the balance there between those 2? And especially in a pandemic year, it's all hands on deck right now. We're needed more than ever for our staff members, mental health support. So basically, if you think of MTSS, it works for adults the same way that it works for kids. And our role as school counselors in that is to assist. Let me move my screen around so I can see what y'all are seeing, is to assist administration in supporting staff mental health. So we tend to be the content experts on our campus for mental health. And if you feel like you're not a content expert on mental health, you have this presentation. You can certainly read up a little bit on it and be your campus mental health expert. But that's sort of who we are on our campus. And so when our principal is worried that the staff is so anxious and, morale is low because of the pandemic, and we can absolutely have a seat at that table to assist with it. We don't want to take it over. We don't want it to get in the way of our kid work, but we can assist. And I think the first thing that's important to kind of clarify is that, and especially with our admin, our school counselor role is primarily to serve students. So if we're spending a lot of our time on adults, we're on the wrong track. We're there primarily to serve students. I don't even talk about this in a regular year. But it's a pandemic year and everybody's struggling. And if we have a little bit that we can do to help, we want to as school counselors. So the idea is that at tier 1, you give educator wellness resources to your staff. So that might be like your principal does the back to school faculty meeting, and you take 10 minutes of that faculty meeting to share module 2 of Project Restore or this educator wellness doc that's linked here. And just like with kids, that's going to take care of most of your staff. Does that mean that they're not stressed? No, we're in a stressful time. We're not getting away from it. But you've given them tools for how to handle their stress, and then they can go forward with that. But just like kids, we're going to get about 10 to 20% of our staff members where that tier 1 support, where you stood up with the principal and talked about module 2 of Project Restore, that wasn't enough for 10 to 20% of your staff. And so for that group, you would want to work alongside your admin. You're not taking anything over, but work alongside your admin with some kind of special interventions. And I've linked to one here that you could use as an example. And even after that, even after you provide like some school-based, like a faculty calming room where staff can go if they really just need to kind of, de-escalate themselves, you're still going to get your 1 to 2% that wasn't enough. And so that's where we, same as for kids, we hand them the sheet that has the list of outside counseling resources, maybe your EAP number for your district, and we help them make that connection. We don't actually counsel them ourselves. We give them the referrals to get to somebody who can. So I think we're going to skip our takeaway because I'm getting very short on time, but you have the takeaway. So you could certainly do this on your own, or, if you want to do it as we're talking, you can. It's just basically writing the MTSS triangle and then plugging in an intervention, a pandemic intervention at each level. So with that, let's get into the conclusion. I want to give you the survey link. I'm going to put it in the chat so that you can take the survey now. It's very short. It's like a minute or two, and it gives me great information on what you all need for the rest of the school year, especially with this school year being so strange and 179 and COVID again. And, you all can tell me things that I might not think of that y'all need. And it also helps me to improve this presentation because, let's be honest, I think this is going to be like the pandemic series. I did one last year. I'm doing it now. I'm going to probably have to come back and actually do a real post-pandemic one, mid-year, end of the year, whatever. So your feedback helps me to make them better and give you exactly what you need. So let me stop my share for a second, and I'm going to put the link to the survey in the chat, and then I will go on. Just give me one moment.
And Stephanie, I looked and do not have the stress management or the crisis documents that you referred to. So if you could send those to me this afternoon, I'll just include it all when I send it out.
I will absolutely do that. Okay, here comes the survey. So you can go ahead and click the survey. Let me know if anybody's not able to access it. While you're clicking the survey, I'm going to write myself a really quick note of those two things that y'all want so that I remember to send them to Valerie. So stress guide, and what was the other one? See, I've already forgotten. Oh, the crisis, yes. Crisis resources. Okay. So while you all fill that survey in, I'm going to share my screen again and go back to just this resources slide that I just want to talk through real quickly. Okay, so basically we said that everything, any resource that we're using to support our kids' pandemic mental health is going to be trauma informed. So what I did is I put together a list of some really helpful trauma informed websites, books, articles that, you know, will just give you a lot more ideas and resources. The first one, I'm not going to go through all of them. I'll just hit a couple of the big ones. The first one, TEA's COVID-19 resource. That's our main pandemic page at TEA. Anything new related to the pandemic pops up on that webpage first. So it's a good webpage to bookmark. That's the first one. I wrote an article for ASCA a couple months ago, or like 6 months ago, called Build Trauma Informed Practices. So I've linked that article for you here. And it's in this, if you get the School Counselor magazine, it's in this one. Looks like, where is it? Looks like this. So it says Build Trauma Informed Practices. And there's a lot more resources. There's another book list here, resource list, that, you know, that you can use. Another resource is, oh, What Happened to You, which I forgot to bring because I'm reading it again. It's such a good book. I'm reading it for the second time at home. And every morning I tell myself, I need to put that book in my book bag. And then of course, I forget. So I don't have it to show you, but let me stop my share real quick and I'll show you what it looks like on Amazon. Let's see. Can you all see that? Great. So it's What Happened to You. It's Conversations on Trauma, Resilience, and Healing. It's written by Dr. Bruce Perry, who is a very well-known child psychiatrist who specializes in trauma work with kids, and Oprah, who has been very verbal and vocal in her life about the trauma she went through as a child. And it is just, it's fascinating. It's a super easy read, and it really gives you a whole kind of new perspective on, you know, what trauma does to people and, you know, just like firsthand accounts. So that's a great option. What else do I have? Pull my PowerPoint back up. I think those were kind of the main ones. The other one, ASCA's Back to School resources. So this just dropped on ASCA's website, I want to say in the last month. It's fantastic. It's just a great webpage for everything back to school related to school counseling. Oh, and two others that I don't have on here that I was going to mention at the beginning, but I forgot. So I'll just mention them now. Two other resources where I see helpful stuff, or either I put helpful stuff or I see helpful stuff, is if you like social media, there's a Facebook group for Texas school counselors. It's called The Great State of Texas School Counselors. It's very easy to find. It's just, if you go to Facebook and you search engine on Facebook search engine, The Great State of Texas School Counselors, it'll pop up. It's a massive group. It's like 4,000 or 5,000 people. I'm not even on Facebook anymore, but I still give it a mention because I know this time of year, it gets really busy with a lot of people asking questions and a lot of people providing answers and resources. So just a really helpful tool there. And then the other one is my own. So I do have Instagram. I love Instagram. I couldn't handle Facebook anymore after all the craziness of 2020. But so I got off Facebook, but I stayed on Instagram. And on my Instagram page, which I'm very easy to find, if you like Instagram, it's School Counselor Stephanie. Just look that up on Instagram. You'll find me. I basically post on that page anything that's like the latest and greatest going on in school counseling. And I actually have sort of neglected it for about a week or two. So there's nothing new on there. But like, for example, I'm just looking at it right now, just to remember what is on there. I posted the book, What Happened to You. I also posted about a PACS training. I also posted ASCA's brand new free to members data tracker, which is, like in the App Store and phenomenal. So there's all kinds of just good stuff you can, if you sort of want to see like what's new in the school counseling world, I put that on my school counselor Stephanie Instagram page. The rest of these I'm not going to go over, but just lots of good resources that can help you as you kind of navigate pandemic, post-pandemic with your kiddos. I think that is it for me. I'm not going to review because I've only talked for an hour, so y'all know what we went over. Questions, comments, concerns, and I don't know, Valerie, if you need to jump in and tell them some stuff. I know we're probably at time, so it's
we're
fine
at
for
time, but
me.
we'll stick around for a little bit. And
Okay.
there's a lot of great information here. So if you guys want to hang around and ask Stephanie a few questions for the next few minutes, if you need to pop off, we understand. We'll get the resources sent out to you this afternoon.
Excellent. Yeah. And, if you want to talk pandemic, feel free to unmute or put a question in the chat. Or if you just want to talk anything school counseling, I mean, I'm TEA, so you have TEA's ear right now, and I'm kind of happy to discuss anything that's on y'all's minds. And Valerie, will you tell me if I can see the chat number, but I can't really see the comments if you're, not the comments, the questions. I see them for a second if they come up and then they go away.
Let's see. So far, I don't see any questions.
The other thing I was going to say, just if anybody's thinking of a question or something they want to share, is just again, a huge thank you to all of you for what you do for kids. I know that we're in the business of solving problems, so we don't often hear about solutions. And so I like to be the one to say thank you on behalf of the students and the families whose lives you are saving. Y'all are saving lives every day. And you might not know it because we don't often get to hear what happens as a result of our school counseling work down the road, but you guys are heroes. And definitely school counseling in the hardest time our country's ever gone through. So my hat's off to all of you. And I just like to say thanks for that.
Okay. Thank you so much, Stephanie, for joining us today. And that is incredible resources. Really, really appreciate what you've shared, and we'll get it sent out today, and appreciate all of you that kind of hung around for us. I don't see any questions in the chat, so we'll go ahead and end our session, but I appreciate you all being here today.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Valerie and Danyata, for handling the tech side. I so appreciate that.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.